They went into the woods as father and daughter, and vanished without a trace. For 6 long years, a mother searched, clinging to hope while the world declared them gone. But when a missing girl's chilling sketchbook appears in the heart of the Olympic forest, a buried secret begins to unravel. This is not just a story about disappearance. It's about the things we don't see, the choices that haunt us, and the question every parent fears most. What if your child is alive, but doesn't remember you? Inspired by true elements of backcountry disappearances, cult rituals, and a mother's unstoppable love, this is The Last Child in the Forest. A psychological mystery, a heartbreaking reunion, a truth that never sleeps beneath the trees. They say the forest remembers. Every broken twig, every echo of laughter, every footstep that touches its soil, it's all there, imprinted somewhere in the silence. On the morning of July 14th, the Olympic National Park in Washington was draped in a golden haze, sunlight filtering through towering cedars and moss-draped firs. It was the kind of morning that smelled of pine needles and possibility. Elena Reed stood on the porch of their modest lakeside home, waving to her husband Daniel and their 5-year-old daughter, Lily, as they loaded up their old Subaru with camping gear, laughter trailing behind them like music. Daniel, a former biology teacher turned wilderness guide, had always found peace in the forest. For him, nature wasn't just a retreat, it was sacred ground. And for Lily, wide-eyed and endlessly curious, the woods were a wonderland where every leaf had a secret, and every trail led to treasure. Elena hadn't joined them this time. A last-minute work call had come in, one she couldn't miss. And though her heart tugged as they drove off, she promised herself it was only 2 days. Just 2 days. She packed Lily's favorite snacks and tucked a hand-drawn note in her backpack. "Be brave, my explorer. Mommy loves you to the moon and back." Daniel smiled when he found it later, sliding it into his coat pocket as he set up camp deep within the Misty Hollow Basin, an isolated section of the forest known only to seasoned hikers. He'd discovered it years ago, a hidden glade ringed by cliffs and a quiet stream, shaded by towering spruce. No cell reception, no people, just the two of them, and the rhythm of the wild. That evening, they made s'mores over a fire crackling low, Daniel reading Lily a story by lantern light, her tiny hands curled around his wrist as she drifted off beneath a sky blooming with stars. The next morning, the storm rolled in faster than anyone predicted. Mountain weather is fickle, cruel. Rain fell in curtains, wind howled through the canyons, and visibility dropped to near nothing. When Elena tried calling, her calls went straight to voicemail. By sunset, she drove to the ranger station herself, eyes wide with worry. A search party launched at dawn, dozens of boots combing trails, drones scanning from above, dogs sniffing soaked earth. They found remnants. Daniel's jacket snagged on a branch near the riverbank, footprints washed out by floodwater, a half-buried camping stove and a patch of mud. But no Lily, no Daniel, nothing more. Days turned to weeks. Weeks dissolved into months. The official report concluded a likely accident. Flash flooding, a potential fall into the ravine, bodies swept away or buried beneath landslide debris. Case closed, tragedy filed. But Elena didn't believe it. Not really. Something deeper gnawed at her, something she couldn't explain. She remembered the message Daniel had left on her voicemail just before the storm hit. A strange shakiness in his voice. Not fear exactly, but urgency. "If anything happens, tell her I love her. Always." That message looped in her head like a haunting lullaby. Because Daniel wasn't the type to panic. And if Lily had truly drowned, why hadn't they found her tiny backpack? Or her rain boots, bright yellow with ladybugs on the side? Why no trace at all? The forest might forget some things, Elena told herself, but not a child. So she didn't move on. While others mourned and let go, she searched for 6 long years. She marked maps, read hiker reports, followed every possible sighting, called in by strangers who thought they'd glimpsed a girl with wide eyes and too old silence. Every year on Lily's birthday, Elena returned to the trailhead, walking until her legs gave out, whispering her daughter's name into the trees. "Come home," she'd plead to the wind. "Please come home." People pitied her. Some gently suggested she seek help, let go. But Elena wasn't delusional. She was a mother. And in the quiet hours of night, when the world slept, she still felt it. A fragile tether, stretched thin across the miles, pulsing faintly between her and her daughter. A tether not yet broken. Something had happened in those woods. Something no storm could explain. Something the forest still remembered, even if no one else did. And one day, it would whisper the truth back. She just had to be listening. The world moved on, as it always does, indifferent to the ache in one mother's chest. Elena Reed's life became a quiet ritual of survival. Coffee left half drunk on the counter, a spare bedroom that remained untouched, and a calendar with a single day circled every July. The day her family vanished. 6 years had passed, and yet time had not dulled the edges. It had only sharpened them into something cold and precise. Each morning she woke with the same weight in her chest, a hollow echo that no breath could fill. People stopped asking how she was. Friends drifted, conversations dulled. The only constant was the silence, and the forest. Always the forest. Elena never stopped visiting the Misty Hollow trailhead. At first, she went weekly, then monthly, and eventually only on days that marked something sacred. Lily's birthday, the anniversary of their disappearance, or when her dreams were too vivid to ignore. In those dreams, Lily was never afraid. She stood in the trees barefoot and laughing, her hair tangled with pine needles. Sometimes she called out. Sometimes she just looked at Elena with a sorrowful expression, like a child waiting too long for someone who never came. Elena learned to follow the dreams, to trust them in a way she couldn't trust people. The dreams led her to strange places, a hunter's shack long abandoned, a fallen tree shaped like a cradle, or a patch of moss that smelled like Daniel's aftershave. None of them revealed anything concrete, but all of them whispered, "Keep going." She kept files, binders full of maps, search patterns, ranger logs, even weather data from the week of the storm. Her living room resembled a war room more than a home. Dots of red marked every place searched. Blue lines traced rivers and creeks. Yellow tabs for reported sightings. She cataloged every shred of information the forest had surrendered, no matter how small. There were false alarms, plenty of them. A little girl in Port Angeles seen walking alone turned out to be a neighbor's child. A necklace found near the Elwha River, almost identical to Lily's, had no DNA traceable to her. Still, Elena investigated each one like her daughter's life depended on it, because it did. Her only ally through those years of solitude was a young detective named Clara Nguyen, newly transferred from Seattle. While most law enforcement treated the Reed case like a closed file, Clara had a different instinct. She saw something in Elena that others dismissed as delusion, but was, in truth, maternal instinct, honed by grief. Clara once told her, "Sometimes the hardest cases are the ones that seem too impossible to reopen." Together, they re-examined everything. One late evening, poring over a map Daniel had annotated years ago, Elena noticed something strange, a small X marked near a ravine that wasn't listed in any official trail guide. Daniel had been planning to explore an unmapped offshoot that weekend, something he'd mentioned in passing. A little hidden stream the rangers don't even talk about. It struck Elena like thunder. How had she overlooked it? The next morning, she and Clara hiked out there. The path was barely visible, overgrown and narrow, more like an animal trail than anything man-made. After nearly 3 hours of climbing, they reached a rock overhang, and beneath it, a half-buried shelter frame. Most of it had collapsed, but one corner remained intact, charred by time. Inside, they found the rusted remains of a stove, an old water canteen, and most haunting of all, tiny hand-drawn shapes etched into the wood. A flower, a stick figure family, and a name scratched faintly in the corner. Lily. Elena dropped to her knees. Her hands trembled as she traced the letters, faded but unmistakable. It was her daughter's handwriting. Not from 6 years ago, but more recent. Slightly sharper. Clara took photographs, called in forensics. For the first time in 6 years, they had tangible proof. Proof that Lily had survived after the day everyone assumed she died. Proof that she had been alive long enough to leave a message. For Elena, the discovery was both a blessing and a curse. Where had Lily gone afterward? Had someone taken her? Was she still out there, waiting, hidden, alone, or worse, manipulated into forgetting who she was? That night, Elena didn't sleep. She sat in Lily's room, untouched since her disappearance, and stared at the starlit ceiling Daniel had painted years ago, filled with constellations and tiny silver dots. "You're still out there," she whispered, "and I will find you." A week later, Clara received a call from a university research team working in the deeper regions of the park. They had detected strange thermal readings in a cave system near the Cascade Forks, close to the uncharted area Daniel had once wanted to explore. When they lowered sensors into the depths of the cave, something triggered the magnetometer, metallic readings inconsistent with the geology. Clara connected the dots immediately. A special recovery team was assembled. Elena wasn't supposed to go with them, but she insisted. "If you find something," she said quietly, "I need to be there. I need to know what it is." They descended into the cave system at dawn. The air was heavy with moisture, the kind that clung to your skin and filled your lungs with damp. Light danced off mineral walls as the team moved deeper, their footsteps echoing like distant memories. Then came the moment. Buried under mineral silt, they uncovered a small child's water bottle, faded pink, with peeling stickers of stars and moons. Elena's breath caught. It was Lily's. She had bought it for her on her 5th birthday, the one with the little rocket ship decal. Nearby, beneath a small crevice, they found a wool scarf, Daniel's, but no bones, no remains. Just things left behind like breadcrumbs in a twisted fairy tale. Someone had been here. Someone had taken great care to erase the rest. The evidence was enough to reopen the case as a criminal investigation, and for the first time, the question shifted from how they disappeared to who had taken her. Elena's hands clenched as she stared into the cave's yawning black mouth. The shadows had kept her child's fate secret long enough. It was time to drag the truth into the light. The cave whispered things Elena couldn't quite hear, as if its walls remembered what had happened but refused to give it all away. In the days following the discovery, the air around the investigation grew heavy with unease. The pink water bottle and Daniel's scarf, both recovered from a depth no hiker would have reached by accident, served as undeniable proof that someone had been there, and more importantly, that Lily had survived far beyond the moment of presumed death. But beyond those items, the cave remained silent, cold, and closed-mouthed. Forensic teams combed every corner, using lights that illuminated even the smallest scrap of cloth, scanners that read heat signatures and mineral inconsistencies. Yet no bones, no body, just traces, just ghosts. Clara stood beside Elena during every briefing, her expression steady but increasingly troubled. "This isn't a site of death," she said quietly one morning, examining the data. "It feels more like a passage, a point of transition." But that theory echoed in Elena's mind. She thought about how Lily's name had been etched into that collapsed shelter, alive, aware, trying to leave something behind. Someone had taken her. That certainty had crystallized into something immovable in Elena's chest. But who? And why? She began combing through ranger logs, volunteer rosters, search and rescue reports from 6 years prior, searching for anything or anyone out of place. Names began to blur together until one stood out, Nolan Blake. A veteran search and rescue officer, with over a decade of fieldwork, Nolan had helped lead the third-day search in the area where the scarf was later found. He had left the Park Service 2 months after the case was closed, citing burnout. But something about his exit timing, his silence, unsettled Clara and Elena. When they pulled his employment records, something darker emerged. A pattern of short contracts, emergency leaves, abrupt relocations. No criminal history, no complaints on paper, but everything just off enough to stir alarm. Clara requested surveillance on his current residence, a remote cabin 40 miles from the nearest town, with no internet, no landline, and homeschooling licenses filed under the name of his wife, Linda Blake. That's when the image arrived, a blurry photo taken by a wildlife camera near Nolan's property. It wasn't meant to capture people, but walking past the frame was a girl, maybe 11 years old, her face turned slightly toward the lens. She was carrying a metal pail, wearing rain boots far too large, and her hair, though darker now, hung in the same uneven waves Elena had combed every night before bed. And her eyes... Elena knew those eyes. "That's Lily," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. The photo alone wasn't proof of identity, but it was enough for a judge to approve a limited surveillance order. Clara drove Elena out under the guise of routine park documentation. From a nearby ridge, through binoculars, they watched the cabin. A woman, early 40s, hanging laundry on a crooked line. A man, heavy-set, always with a radio clipped to his belt. But it was the girl who stopped Elena's breath. She ran from the barn toward the woods, laughing, calling out something they couldn't hear. And for the briefest moment, she turned back and smiled. Elena nearly dropped the binoculars. She doesn't remember me, she murmured, stunned. She doesn't even know. Clara placed a hand gently on her shoulder. But she's alive. The words didn't feel real. Not after 6 years of grief, of mourning and silence, of imagining 1,000 ways Lily might have suffered. And now here she was, alive, breathing, laughing, and raised by the man who had killed Daniel. Surveillance continued. Over 3 days, they observed a strict routine. The Blakes lived as if nothing was wrong. Gardening, schooling, cooking dinner at sunset. The girl, who they called Hope, seemed well fed, physically healthy, but emotionally, Elena could see the gaps. She was too quiet, too obedient, never straying more than a few yards from either adult. When she laughed, it was always short-lived. Clara compiled the evidence, the photo, the school records, the overlapping timelines. A raid was imminent, but Elena asked for one more night. Just one, she said, her voice cracking. I need to know if she dreams of me the way I dream of her. So she returned to the ridge and watched. That night, long after the cabin lights dimmed, Elena sat beneath a canopy of stars, wrapped in Daniel's old jacket, heart breaking and mending all at once. In the stillness, she heard something unexpected. A lullaby, faint, carried on the wind. The same melody she used to hum while brushing Lily's hair before bed. Her eyes filled with tears. Lily remembered something. Maybe not names, maybe not faces, but something had survived. The next morning, Clara received the final go-ahead. Full custody retrieval, coordinated with child services and local SWAT. But Elena didn't want a violent rescue. She's known only them for 6 years. If we rip her away like a prisoner, she'll never trust the truth. Clara hesitated. You want to go in first? Elena nodded. As her mother. The plan was risky, but approved. That evening, as the Blakes prepped dinner, Elena walked down the hill alone. No badge, no gun. Just a heart full of memories and a name she hadn't spoken aloud in 6 years without breaking. Lily, she called softly across the yard. The girl looked up from where she was setting plates. Their eyes met. Everything stilled. And in that suspended moment, before Nolan's shadow stepped into the doorway, before Clara gave the signal from the ridge, before the world would break open, Lily tilted her head and blinked, something ancient and instinctive flickering behind her eyes. Recognition, not of memory, but of something deeper, blood calling to blood. Elena stepped forward. I'm your mother, she whispered, and I've come to bring you home. For a moment, the world didn't breathe. The air between Elena and the girl felt thick with 6 years of silence, memory, and longing. The name Hope trembled on the edge of the girl's lips as she looked at the woman standing in her yard. This stranger who had just called her Lily. Her brow furrowed, not with fear, but with the deep, confused concentration of a child hearing something forbidden, yet familiar. She took a single step forward, fingers still clutching the corner of a worn dish towel. Inside the cabin, Nolan's voice called out, casual and unsuspecting, Hope, sweetheart, dinner's almost ready. And that simple sentence shattered the spell. The girl flinched, turned slightly, and in her eyes Elena saw it. Hesitation. Conditioning. She had been taught not to question, not to wander, not to remember. Wait, Elena whispered, taking a soft step closer, her hands visible and empty. I won't hurt you. I used to sing you a song at bedtime. It went like this. And then she hummed it, the same lullaby she had once sung under a glow-in-the-dark ceiling filled with stars, the one Lily used to mumble along to as she drifted to sleep. The girl froze. Her lips parted. She didn't join in, but her eyes, wide and stormy, began to shimmer. Behind her, Nolan stepped into the doorway, and in that instant his entire body stiffened. Elena saw the flash of recognition in his eyes, the realization that the woman standing in his yard was not a lost hiker or a ranger or a passerby. She was the mother. Hope, inside. Now. His voice was still calm, but the edge was unmistakable. The girl hesitated, torn between his command and the invisible pull of the woman who somehow knew her lullaby. It's okay, Elena said gently, sensing the danger, eyes never leaving Nolan's. You don't have to go. But the moment was broken. Nolan strode forward, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. I don't know what you think you're doing here, ma'am, he said, his voice dark and calculated, but I suggest you leave. You're upsetting my daughter. She's not your daughter, Elena replied, barely louder than a breath. Her name is Lily Reed, and you killed her father. That landed like a blow. Nolan's jaw twitched, his grip tightening. Behind them, agents began to emerge from the tree line, Clara leading with a raised badge and an unwavering stare. "Nolan Blake," she called out. "Step away from the child. You are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Reed and the abduction of Lily Reed." Chaos unfolded. Nolan made a last desperate move, pulling Lily toward him, but Clara and the team were faster. Officers surged in, weapons drawn but disciplined, surrounding the man who had stolen a child and 6 years of her life. Elena didn't see the exact moment Nolan was cuffed and pulled away. Her eyes never left her daughter. Lily stood still as stone, tears starting to form not from fear, but from sheer confusion. Her body trembled, but she didn't run. She didn't scream. She looked at Elena with a heartbreaking kind of wonder, as if trying to peer into a story that had been hidden from her since birth. "I don't understand," she said softly, voice breaking. "Why are they taking Daddy away?" Elena fell to her knees in the dirt. "Because he lied to you, sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking. "He told you stories to protect himself. But I'm here now, and I promise you I will never lie to you. Not about who you are, not about what happened, not about how much I've missed you." The girl's face twisted in silent pain. "My name is Hope. That's what they called you," Elena said, nodding gently. "But before that, before all of this, your name was Lily. You used to wear ladybug boots. You loved strawberry jam. You called the moon your nightlight. I was there when you said your first word. It was Papa, and I was there the first time you fell asleep on my chest and drooled all over my favorite sweater. I was your whole world, Lily. And then, one day, you were taken from me." Lily didn't speak. Her lips trembled. Her eyes searched Elena's face, as if trying to match it with some image stored deep in the vault of her earliest memories. And then, barely audible, she whispered, "You had long hair." Elena smiled through her tears. "Yes. You used to tug on it when you wanted my attention." A single sob escaped Lily's throat. She took a halting step forward, then another. Then she collapsed into Elena's arms. The sound she made was not recognition. It was grief. The unspoken mourning of a child realizing her whole life was built on lies. Elena held her tightly, rocking her back and forth, whispering over and over, "You're safe now. You're safe. I've got you. I've got you." Behind them, officers led Nolan into a cruiser. His face was unreadable, but Elena didn't look back. Her world had narrowed to the small, shaking body in her arms, the girl who didn't quite remember her, but who had run to her anyway. Later that night, in a safe house arranged by Child Services, Lily, still overwhelmed, still silent, sat in a chair wrapped in a blanket, staring at the floor. A counselor would come the next day. Therapy would begin. A long road lay ahead. But for now, Elena simply sat beside her. No questions. No pressure. Just presence. After an hour, Lily spoke. "If he's not my real dad, does that mean I had a different birthday?" Elena blinked back fresh tears. "You were born on April 27th, 5 weeks early, and I never stopped calling that the luckiest day of my life." Lily didn't respond, but a flicker of something passed through her expression. A seed planted. Something she could hold on to as her entire world began to rewrite itself. She leaned her head against Elena's arm, and for the first time since their reunion, she closed her eyes, not in fear, but in fragile trust. Elena didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stared out the window into the darkened trees and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "Welcome home, my love." In the hours following Nolan Blake's arrest, the cabin that had served as Lily's prison disguised as a home became the focal point of a full-scale forensic operation. Floodlights bathed the property in an unnatural glow, as agents in protective suits moved like silent ghosts, collecting every trace, every paper scrap, every object that might answer the question burning in everyone's mind. How had a child vanished from the national consciousness for 6 years without a trace? Elena remained at the safe house with Lily, who was now under protective custody, but Clara Nguyen, relentless and methodical, stayed behind to oversee the search. The front of the house was deceptively normal. Flower pots on the porch, framed photographs on the mantel, homemade curtains sewn with quiet precision. But the deeper they went, the more the illusion began to crumble. In the cellar, beneath floorboards recently reinforced, they discovered a hidden room. The door had no handle from the inside. It was a space just large enough for a mattress, a shelf of books, and a small table. The walls were painted pale yellow, as if someone had tried to mimic warmth, but the paint was chipped, stained in places with what appeared to be crayon markings. On the wall above the bed, 5 tallies were scratched into the wood. 5 years. Lily had once kept count. What happened in the 6th? Had she given up hope, or simply forgotten why she was counting? Inside a trunk beneath the bed, investigators found old drawings, childlike renditions of forests, of a faceless woman with long hair, of a little girl holding hands with 2 adults, one of them distinctly taller than the other. But the most disturbing discovery came from a locked metal box hidden behind insulation in the crawlspace. It contained documents, meticulously crafted adoption papers, forged school transcripts, even a handwritten journal by Linda Blake, Nolan's wife. The journal was not a diary. It was a manifesto. In its pages, she wrote of Lily, hope, as a divine gift, a child delivered through fire and fate. She described the night Nolan had brought Lily home as the night everything broken in our lives began to heal. There were chilling entries describing how they dyed Lily's hair, taught her new stories to replace the old ones, slowly erasing her past and rebuilding her identity from scratch. But it was what wasn't in the journal that chilled Clara the most. There was no mention of Daniel, no confession of murder, no remorse. As if he'd simply never existed, like he was a piece of the truth they had erased just as thoroughly as they'd tried to erase Lily's mother. Clara handed the evidence over to the district attorney, knowing it would seal the Blakes' fate in court. But the questions kept mounting. Why had they stayed in Washington, so close to the original crime scene? Why hadn't they run? One possible answer came from an old Polaroid taped to the inside of a cabinet door in the basement. It showed Nolan and Linda standing beside a child, Lily, at what looked like the edge of a trailhead. Her face was turned away, but the timestamp was burned into the photo. August 1st, 2017, barely 2 weeks after the abduction. Behind them, a forest ranger's truck sat in the background. Clara zoomed in. The license plate was familiar. It belonged to Ranger Tom Avery, a longtime park employee who'd retired 3 years prior. Clara's gut twisted. She remembered Tom from the early days of the reopened investigation. Friendly, cooperative, offering tea and tales about search protocol and long-forgotten trails. Could he have helped cover it up? A deeper background check revealed that Tom Avery and Nolan Blake had worked together for nearly a decade, sometimes on overlapping rescue shifts. Elena's grief, it seemed, had not just been ignored. It had been orchestrated. As the investigation expanded, agents searched Avery's former home and discovered a second cabin deed. This one located even deeper in the forest, not registered under his name, but under a shell company linked to an old family trust. Clara led the team into the woods, taking a trail so narrow and overgrown it barely existed. When they reached the cabin, a silence hung thick in the air. Dust coated the windows. Inside, they found furniture covered in sheets, preserved as though someone had intended to return. But what caught Clara's eye was the wall by the fireplace, a series of hooks holding small items, a yellow raincoat, a stuffed bear, a broken butterfly hair clip, personal effects, none of them Lily's, but clearly belonging to children. Multiple children. A sickening possibility took shape. Could there have been other victims? Other abductions covered up beneath the guise of accidents in the park? If so, who else had been involved? Had Nolan and Linda acted alone, or had they been part of something bigger, darker? Clara photographed every item, every corner, sent out alerts to nearby counties to cross-reference missing persons cases. But even as she worked, a dread grew inside her. Because if there had been other children, where were they now? And why had only Lily survived? That night, as the evidence piled higher than anyone expected, Clara called Elena. She kept her voice calm, measured, but she didn't sugarcoat the truth. They built an entire life around her, she said quietly. They planned it from the beginning. Not just the abduction, everything. It wasn't a desperate act. It was designed. On the other end of the line, Elena sat on the edge of a hotel bed, watching Lily sleep, curled into a ball, hands still clutching the stuffed rabbit child services had given her that afternoon. "I always thought," Elena whispered, "that whoever took her must have been broken. But now, I think they believed they were saving her." "That's what makes it worse," Clara said. "They convinced themselves they were good people." A silence passed between them, heavy, irrevocable. Then Clara added, "We're not at the end of this, Elena. We might only be at the beginning." Elena knew it too, because even though Lily was back, The ghosts were still whispering in the trees. And now, for the first time, Elena feared the forest hadn't just stolen her daughter. It might have kept secrets far more terrible than she'd ever imagined. It began with a photograph, an old, slightly curled Polaroid found in a cracked wooden drawer in the second cabin. A boy, no older than 6, standing barefoot outside a weathered shelter deep in the forest. His face was blank, almost too blank, like he'd been told not to smile. Behind him, partially visible in the shadows, was a woman, definitely not Linda Blake, her features obscured, but her presence unmistakably maternal, and pinned to the boy's shirt was a laminated tag that read, "Camp Winding Pines." Clara squinted at it for a long time, then cross-referenced the name. The camp had closed in 2010 following a fire that destroyed half the property. No known fatalities, no lawsuits, just a quiet shutdown and a whisper in a few local papers about unsafe conditions. But what struck Clara wasn't the camp, it was the boy. His face. She had seen it before. She pulled up an archived missing persons report from the same year. Aiden Cross, age 6, disappeared while hiking with his father in Olympic National Park. The case had gone cold, ruled a likely fall into a gorge. No body ever found. No belongings recovered. His photo matched the one in the Polaroid almost perfectly, except for the eyes. In the original photo, Aiden's eyes were full of life. In the cabin photo, they were vacant. Clara's heart sank. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It never had been. She contacted Elena immediately. "We need to talk," she said, voice urgent but steady. That afternoon, they met at the precinct while Lily was at her first therapy session with Dr. Martinez, a trauma specialist. Elena's face was pale, drawn. Her nights had been sleepless. Lily, though safe, was quiet, distrustful, and often confused. She still called herself Hope. She still asked when she'd be going home. "I haven't told her yet," Elena whispered as they sat in Clara's office. "About her father, about what happened to him." Clara understood. There were some truths even time couldn't cushion. "You need to see this," Clara said, handing her the Polaroid. Elena stared, confused at first, until Clara pulled up Aiden's missing poster. When the pieces clicked, Elena leaned back, exhaling as if someone had punched the breath from her lungs. "How many?" she asked. Clara hesitated. "We've found references to at least 3 other children in that second cabin. Clothing, small shoes, handwriting samples, all boys. All matching disappearances from nearby counties between 2009 and 2016, none confirmed, yet." Elena buried her face in her hands. "So Lily was just one of many?" "We don't know if it was a pattern or a partnership," Clara said, "but Nolan and Linda had a system, and we need to understand if someone else was part of it." That night, Elena sat with Lily in their shared room at the safe house. The girl was staring at the ceiling again, tracing invisible shapes in the air. Elena reached over, gently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Do you remember anyone else?" she asked. "Any other kids?" Lily didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling. "There was a boy once," she said softly. "He didn't stay long." Elena's heart stopped. "Do you remember his name?" Lily shook her head. "He called me Bluebird. I don't know why." Elena swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "Did they hurt him?" Lily's hands fidgeted with the corner of her blanket. "He cried a lot. Then one day, they said he had to leave because he didn't listen, and I never saw him again." The room fell silent. Elena fought the tears rising in her throat. She didn't press further, not yet, but the revelation confirmed what they feared. Lily had not been the only stolen child, and she might be the only one who made it out. Over the next week, Clara expanded the investigation with the FBI's help. The second cabin's land was traced back to a now-deceased man named Harold Avery, Ranger Tom Avery's father. Publicly, it had been left to no one. Privately, it was being used by someone, possibly multiple someones, who had access to trails, records, and backcountry shelters most civilians never knew existed. Aiden Cross, Jesse Martin, Noah Pierce. Names began to fill a wall in Clara's temporary command center. All young boys. All disappeared under circumstances too similar to ignore. Some vanished from the park. Others from campsites. One even from a gas station on the highway leading into the forest. In each case, the trail had gone cold within 48 hours. No suspects, no bodies, until now. As the net widened, a pattern emerged. not just in timing or location, but in behavior. The victims were always young, always trusting, and always vanished during transitional moments, moves, divorces, holidays, when attention was low and emotional vulnerability was high. Whoever had orchestrated this had understood psychology just as much as geography. Clara's team began interviewing former rangers, trail volunteers, even long-retired station clerks. Most remembered Nolan as reserved, competent, and forgettable. That, Clara realized, had been his strength. He was the kind of man no one watched too closely. But one former staffer recalled something odd. A woman who sometimes waited at trailheads, offering food or water to families in distress. She was described as church mother kind, polite, but too curious. A sketch artist was brought in. The image bore eerie resemblance to a woman named Margaret Holloway, Linda Blake's older sister, presumed estranged, except she wasn't. Her name appeared in an old rental agreement for a trailer near Camp Winding Pines. The FBI issued a bolo, be on the lookout. And within 48 hours, agents located her in rural Idaho. When approached, she attempted to flee, crashing her car into a tree. In the trunk, they found children's toys, a photo of Nolan holding Lily, and a manila folder marked with hand-drawn hearts. Inside, names, dates, locations, a ledger. Clara stared at it in disbelief. It wasn't just a ring. It was an operation, possibly a network. Margaret was in custody. Nolan refused to talk. Linda, in isolation, continued to insist they had saved Hope. But Elena, sitting alone outside the therapy room, while Lily practiced building sentences with Dr. Martinez, knew the truth was only beginning to reveal itself. Her daughter had escaped, but others might not have. And now, the question was no longer just what had happened. It was how far it went, and how many lives the forest had swallowed whole while no one was looking. The manila folder found in Margaret Holloway's trunk was deceptively ordinary, frayed at the corners, stained with water, its cover soft from overuse. But inside, it held the weight of years. Names written in careful feminine handwriting, some underlined in red, some followed by symbols, stars, triangles, or simply an X. At first, Clara thought it was a crude contact list, but the deeper she read, the more it became clear. This was a record, a ledger of children. Dozens of entries, each with a date, a location, and occasionally a brief note. Resistant, placed, ill, or the most chilling of all, silenced. The earliest entry was dated 2006. The most recent was 3 months before Lily had been recovered. Most of the names were first names only. Aiden, Jesse, Marla, Eli, but some included initials, locations, or symbols that matched park trail designations. They were keeping track, Clara said, standing over the evidence table, her voice low with restrained fury. This wasn't random. This was systematic. The FBI team began the painstaking task of cross-referencing the names with missing children reports. Within 48 hours, they had 12 preliminary matches. 12 children, all under the age of 10, all disappeared in or around the Olympic Peninsula, and all declared lost due to presumed accidents, family runaways, or miscommunication between jurisdictions. It was a pattern hidden beneath red tape and bureaucratic blindness. Elena sat in the adjacent room, watching through the glass, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Lily was in her second week of therapy, slowly opening up, though she still often retreated into silence when asked direct questions. She spoke in fragments, recalled memories in colors and sounds rather than names. There were songs, she told Dr. Martinez one afternoon, but not lullabies, the kind that make you sleepy, the kind that make you forget. Elena's skin crawled when she heard that. Forgetting had become a survival tool, and it worked. Margaret Holloway, now in custody, remained uncooperative. Her calm demeanor cracked only when Clara presented the ledger. "You don't understand," Margaret said, her voice calm, as if discussing nothing more than a misplaced library book. "These children were unloved, unwanted. We gave them homes. We gave them purpose." Clara leaned forward, voice like a blade. "You gave them silence. You gave them graves." But Margaret didn't flinch. "Not all of them," she replied softly. "Some were adopted, others placed with families who understood." "Families like the Blakes?" Clara snapped. "You call that understanding?" Margaret's eyes darkened. Hope was happy. She had pancakes on Saturdays and a father who read to her. What did her birth mother give her? Loss? The words hit Clara like poison. But before she could respond, Margaret said something else, something that chilled everyone in the room. There are others. You'll never find them all. Back at the safe house, Elena stared at a photocopy of the ledger, her eyes fixated on a name circled in blue, Isla. No last name, no date, but something about it stirred her. Lily used to name her dolls, she said to Clara when she arrived. Isla was her favorite. She said it meant island girl. It was her secret name, the one she wanted to use when she grew up and became an explorer. Clara's heart dropped. So that entry might have been a way to identify her without using her real name. Elena nodded. They weren't just erasing them. They were renaming them. Further down the list, Clara spotted another familiar name, one that had been long buried in the search archives. N. Avery. Not a child, but a person, a provider, a connection. Nolan and Linda Blake had hidden Lily, but the deeper web led back to someone else. Someone who had disappeared off the grid 2 years ago and had never been brought in for questioning. Tom Avery, retired park ranger, longtime friend of Nolan Blake, the same man who had once been helpful in the early investigation, the man who had shared tea with Clara, who had told her stories about trails and weather and how sometimes the forest takes what it wants. Clara remembered every word now, and she remembered something else, the way he had known about the broken lock at Shelter 9, even though the incident wasn't on any of the public reports. He hadn't just known the trails, he had known the secrets hidden between them. A search warrant was issued that night. Avery's retirement home near Forks, Washington, was abandoned. A neighbor claimed he had left for the mountains a week earlier, after the Blake arrest made the news. Said he needed to clear his head. But Clara knew better. He was running. Running not from guilt, but from exposure. In his home, investigators found a locked safe beneath a loose floorboard in the garage. Inside were photographs, some old and faded, others newer. All children. Some smiling, some unsmiling. Some labeled with initials, others with stars. Among them, tucked between pages of a notebook, was a photo of Lily, taken when she couldn't have been more than 6, sitting on a swing made of braided rope, her expression blank, staring at something just outside the frame. Clara's hands shook as she set it down. He had been watching. He had been part of it. The notebook revealed even more. Names of park employees, overlapping shifts, blank entries where records should have existed, and worse, notations of scheduled transfers. One entry stood out. S. Freeman, Cascade South Shelter, Septon 14 delayed. The date was 1 week before Lily had been found. He was preparing another move, Clara whispered. Another child. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did Elena. She sat beside Lily, who had finally fallen asleep after hours of quiet whimpering, her body curling closer to her mother's every time Elena moved. Elena couldn't help but wonder how many other mothers were still out there waiting, believing their child had drowned, had run away, had vanished forever, when really they had been swallowed by a network of people who believed they were doing something righteous. The ledger was no longer just a piece of evidence. It was a map, a confession, a promise that the nightmare had not ended, and that justice would have to stretch beyond one arrest, one rescue, one broken family. As the sun rose over the mist-shrouded trees, Elena whispered a vow to her sleeping daughter. "We'll find the others. We have to, because no one else should wait as long as I did." The forest was changing. Not in any visible way, but in the way it felt. It had stopped being a landscape of trees and trails and turned into something colder, older, and far more dangerous. For Clara, every rustle now sounded like footsteps, every shadow like a memory that refused to die. The net was closing, but Tom Avery, former ranger, once considered a gentle grandfatherly figure by the community, had become a ghost. Since his disappearance, they had tracked several tips from remote areas of the Pacific Northwest. A gas station security camera in Yakima caught someone matching his profile, buying canned food and a map. 2 days later, a hunter swore he saw him crossing a ravine near Mount Rainier, wearing a ranger's jacket and carrying a field radio. The man had lived off the land for decades. Now he was simply returning to it, to hide, to vanish, or perhaps to finish what had been interrupted. Clara stood in front of the operations board in their temporary command post, studying a map littered with colored pins and strings. A red pin marked every known location tied to a missing child. Blue marked cabin discoveries. Yellow marked witness sightings of Avery. A pattern was emerging. "He's circling back," she told her team. "It's not random. He's heading for something." The words hung in the air like fog. Elena, now working unofficially with the FBI as a civilian liaison, had grown more determined by the hour. She wasn't sleeping much, but she wasn't slowing down either. Every file, every case, every mother she met in the online groups she'd secretly joined gave her one more reason to press forward. These weren't isolated incidents. They were links in a chain. And Avery was the rusted lock at the end. When Clara handed Elena a copy of a child's drawing found among Avery's belongings, something inside her broke. It was a sketch of a house in the woods with 4 windows, smoke curling from the chimney, and a smiling sun overhead. In the yard stood 3 stick figures, 2 adults and a small child with pigtails. Over the drawing, written in crayon, were the words, "Home Forever." "She drew this," Elena whispered. "Lily. This is hers. I used to hang her drawings on the fridge." Clara placed a hand gently on Elena's shoulder. "We're going to bring him in. I promise." That same night, a breakthrough came, not from police work, but from a park ranger named Luis Ortega, who had worked seasonal shifts in the Olympic region from 2008 to 2015. Luis had been going through old GPS logs of backcountry trail inspections when he noticed something odd. Avery had frequently logged visits to a region known as the Frostline Cut, an unofficial name for a high-altitude zone deep in the Cascades, unreachable during winter and nearly forgotten by spring. It wasn't on the official patrol schedule. It wasn't even on most maps. But Avery had logged at least 8 visits there over a span of 5 years. No other rangers had done so. "Why?" Clara asked aloud. "Why keep going back there unless there's something to hide?" A decision was made. The next morning, Clara, 2 FBI agents, and a K-9 unit began the trek into the frost line. Elena wasn't supposed to come. She was not law enforcement, not trained, not authorized, but she came anyway. "He's the reason my daughter can't sleep through the night," she said flatly. "I have a right to see this through." They allowed it. 6 hours into the hike, the group reached a narrow ledge lined with spruce and ice-blasted stone. Beyond it lay a narrow gorge and what appeared to be a man-made structure, barely visible through the branches. It looked like a bunker or supply shack, built into the rock and camouflaged by moss and age. "We found it," Clara said, voice low. The dog barked, tense, alert. Inside, the shack was dark, musty, and empty, but not abandoned. A cot with a recently used sleeping bag, half-eaten food, a stack of notebooks, and pinned to the wall, a faded photo of a young boy smiling at a lake, another missing child, another name from the ledger. Clara opened the notebooks with latex gloves. The handwriting was Avery's. But it wasn't journal entries. It was documentation. Observations, thoughts, rationalizations. "We only took the lonely ones, the drifters, the ones who needed rescue, the ones the world forgot." Clara's blood turned to ice. One line, written over and over across 4 pages, was almost manic. "The forest always takes. We only listened." It wasn't just a justification. It was a belief system, a mythology. Avery had turned the forest into a god, and himself into its priest. The agents fanned out to secure the area, but as they stepped outside, one of them paused. "We've got movement," he said into the radio. 50 feet up the ridge, a shadow moved. Slow, hunched, deliberate. A man, tall, gray-bearded, carrying a walking stick. He didn't run when he saw them. He simply raised his hands and said, "I figured you'd come." Tom Avery was arrested without resistance, but what chilled Clara most was his expression. Not fear, not regret, but peace. As if the capture had been part of the plan all along. As if the forest had whispered and he had obeyed. During the interrogation, Avery gave very little. Only cryptic references to "the ones who remained" and a murmured warning. "They don't stop, even if I do." When asked who "they" were, he smiled and said, "The others who still believe. You think I was alone?" Clara left the room shaking. They had caught a man, but not the machine. Avery was just one limb of something far older, far more organized. Elena stood outside the glass, watching Avery like one might watch a caged predator. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her face said everything. This isn't over. And it wasn't. The forest had given up one of its monsters. But what of the rest? The names on the ledger still glowed on Clara's wall, each one a story unfinished. And somewhere out there, other children, now grown or lost, or living under different names, were still waiting for someone to come looking. The week after Avery's arrest felt like the eye of a hurricane. Quiet on the surface, yet underneath, everything was shifting. Clara's inbox overflowed with tips, messages, and letters from families who had once reported missing children but had long since given up. Some were desperate and vague, others strangely specific. One came from a woman in Oregon who claimed her adoptive son had drawn a cabin that matched the photo from the frost line cut. Another was from a social worker in Montana who remembered a little girl who had appeared out of nowhere with no birth certificate but a faint tattoo of a pine tree on her shoulder. The FBI launched a special task force to analyze these leads, and Clara worked side by side with a forensic psychologist to re-examine the ledger found in Margaret Holloway's car. They were looking for connections, for patterns, anything that could trace where the rest of the children had gone. Meanwhile, Elena took on a quieter role, one that required more strength than anyone around her realized. She joined group therapy with other mothers of recovered or still missing children. She started documenting her own memories, and Lily's, in long notebooks filled with fragments, drawings, and dreams. One morning, Lily came to her with a folded piece of paper. "I remembered her," she whispered. Elena opened the paper carefully. A child's drawing again. Two girls holding hands beneath a large moon. One was Lily. The other had a name scribbled beneath her feet. Mina. The name didn't appear in the ledger, but something about it struck Elena deeply. When she showed it to Clara, they dug into archives and discovered that a 5-year-old girl named Mina Tran had gone missing from a roadside campground in Northern California in 2017. Her case had been closed due to a presumed drowning. What if she was with Lily? Elena asked. What if there are more survivors out there, just waiting for someone to believe them? That question became the compass for the next phase of their investigation. Clara began organizing interviews with formerly missing children who had resurfaced in recent years under mysterious circumstances. Children who had never fully explained where they had been or who had come back changed. One of them was a boy named Josh, now 16, adopted by a family in Idaho, after being found wandering alone in Glacier National Park at age 10. When approached by Clara, he was reluctant, silent at first, sullen, but then she showed him a photo of Lily. "Do you know her?" He stared at it for a long time, then slowly he nodded. "She used to hum," he said quietly. "All the time, even when they told her not to." His voice cracked. She was brave. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "Where were you?" Josh hesitated. "It was underground, but not like a basement. It smelled like dirt and old rain." That small haunting detail opened up a flood of memories. Over the next week, 3 more children were identified as potential survivors, each with different stories but a shared thread. They remembered forests, darkness, and rules. They had been told to forget their names, to forget their mothers, to never tell the truth. Clara called them the silent survivors, not because they didn't speak, but because they had never been asked the right questions. The trauma had been buried so deeply it took specific smells, sounds, and drawings to pull the memories back to the surface. Elena took it upon herself to create a digital registry of these children's recollections, a protected, encrypted archive of names, faces, and fragments. She called it the Map of Remembering. Every thread helped reveal a broader web, and slowly the fog began to lift. One survivor remembered a man named Father Eli. Another mentioned a woman with silver rings and a necklace made of carved wood. These were new players, people not yet arrested, not named in the original ledger. The network hadn't died with Avery or Holloway. It was wider, quieter, still moving like roots beneath the soil. And then came the most jarring clue yet. In a video recording from a 2014 backcountry trail dedication ceremony, Clara spotted a man standing in the background, watching from behind the crowd, not clapping, not smiling. She zoomed in. The facial recognition software returned a partial match. Dr. Jonah Merrick, a psychologist once contracted by several foster care facilities across the western states. He had vanished from public records in 2016 after his license was suspended due to boundary violations with minors. "We've been looking in the wrong places," Clara muttered. This wasn't just park rangers and remote shelters. This went through institutions, through adoption channels, through people who knew how to hide behind paperwork. The scope of it all made Elena dizzy, but it also gave her clarity. The battle for Lily's return had always been about more than just one child. It was about giving voice to all those who had been silenced, and now, for the first time in years, those voices were being heard. At night, Elena read Lily the stories of other survivors. Carefully, gently, she told her not everything at once, just enough to let her know, you were not alone. Lily began drawing again, this time not just dark forests and cabins, but faces, names, smiles. It was as though something inside her had started to thaw, and one evening she looked up and asked, "Mommy, is Mina still out there?" Elena paused. "I think she might be," she said. "And if she is, we're going to find her." Because that was the promise now. Not just to one child, but to all of them. To those still missing. To those who came back changed. And to those who had never been looked for at all. The forest didn't speak in words, but it had its ways. Shifting winds, broken twigs where none should be, echoes that didn't match the space. Clara had been in law enforcement long enough to dismiss superstition, but ever since Avery's capture, she'd begun to sense something deeper, something watching. Even the dogs hesitated in places where the trees grew too closely, where moss clung to bark like memory. Then came the letter. It arrived not at headquarters, but at Clara's personal P.O. box, handwritten in graphite, the envelope smudged by rain. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds, the handwriting uneven, almost childlike. "I know where she is. Not all of them are dead. Some of us are still in the forest. The others don't hear it anymore. But I do. Come alone. No police. Or she disappears again." It was signed simply, Mina. Clara froze. They had searched for Minatron for weeks, tracing old reports and running her name through every possible database. But nothing had surfaced. No paper trail. No credit history, no sightings. And now, this. She brought the letter to Elena's house in silence. When Elena read it, her hands trembled. "She's alive," she whispered. "She's really out there." But that wasn't the only unsettling part. Folded inside the letter was a pressed flower, rare, small, deep violet. Clara recognized it immediately. Ghost orchid. It didn't grow in the Olympic region, only in a small, protected pocket of forest along the Columbia River Gorge. Years ago, Avery had once logged a solo patrol there, just once, but it hadn't made sense at the time. Now, it did. "She's drawn us in," Clara said, "or someone is." The next day, they drove south, Clara, Elena, and a discreet agent named Davis, who agreed to stay hidden and out of sight. They reached the outer trails of the gorge at dawn, the sun barely touching the tops of the fir trees. It was beautiful and dangerous, the kind of beauty that lulled hikers into forgetting how easy it was to vanish among the thickets. Following Clara's instincts and the coordinates faintly penciled on the back of the letter, they hiked along a disused path that hadn't seen a footprint in years. It twisted around narrow ledges beneath rock overhangs, across a fallen bridge. Then they found it, a clearing, and in its center, a spiral of stones, carefully arranged around a tree with a hollow base. Not a shelter, not a bunker, a message. Elena stepped forward and knelt by the spiral. In the center, someone had placed a small wooden pendant carved with the shape of a girl's face. Beneath it, a note. "You're close. Don't let them follow." Clara's eyes scanned the surrounding forest. "She's watching us?" "Or being watched," Elena added. As they turned to leave the clearing, a soft whistle echoed from the trees. High-pitched, two short bursts, then silence. It was a signal, and Clara recognized it. It matched a field code used by Avery's ranger unit from over a decade ago, meant to signal danger or retreat. "Someone's trying to warn us," she said. That night, they stayed in a ranger cabin nearby, uneasily sleeping in shifts. Elena dreamt of Lily as a toddler again, only this time the child turned away from her, her mouth sewn shut with threads made of vines. She woke up gasping. The next morning brought fog so thick it turned the forest to milk, and with it came movement. Clara heard it first, quick, padded footsteps moving through the underbrush. She followed alone, cautiously, until she reached the edge of a slope where ferns blanketed the ground. And there, standing at the bottom, was a girl, no older than 11, barefoot, wearing a faded hoodie and clutching a sketchbook to her chest. Mina. Her eyes met Clara's for only a second before she darted away, disappearing into the mist like smoke. Clara shouted after her, but didn't pursue, afraid to startle or scare her further. Instead, she returned to the cabin and told Elena what she saw. Elena's response was immediate. "She came to see you. She's leading you." They waited. And later that evening, as the fog lifted slightly, Clara found something outside the door. A torn page from Mina's sketchbook. On it was a drawing of a girl chained to a tree, while others watched from the shadows. Below it, written in thin, uneven script, "He's still out there." The one they called the Quiet Man. The phrase chilled Clara more than she could say. It wasn't in any of their files, but something about it felt old, ritualistic. That night, Clara called an old contact, an anthropologist who had once worked on fringe cult behavior in the Pacific Northwest. When she mentioned the Quiet Man, there was a long pause on the other end. Then, "I've heard that name, in stories. Folklore passed among isolated survivalist groups. A figure who collects children in exchange for peace with the forest. They think he keeps balance, keeps nature calm, that when the Quiet Man is ignored, the land punishes." "You think Avery believed that?" "I think Avery wasn't the only one." Clara hung up, blood cold. They weren't just chasing a criminal ring anymore. They were pulling at the roots of a belief system passed like poison through generations. And now, one of the children it had stolen, Mina, was trying to lead them into the heart of it. But the forest didn't give back what it took so easily, and Clara knew the next steps would be the most dangerous of all. Because if the Quiet Man was real, metaphor or man, he would not let them leave again without a price dot. They returned to the clearing at dawn, the one where the spiral of stones had first appeared. This time, Elena walked ahead, her hands trembling but steady enough to brush against the moss-covered bark of each tree she passed, as if asking permission to enter. The forest was quieter than before, not in the way of calm, but in the way of anticipation, like it was holding its breath. In her coat pocket, Clara carried the torn page Mina had left behind. The image of the chained girl burned into her thoughts. She couldn't sleep the night before. Her mind kept circling that name, the Quiet Man. Was it a title passed among predators? Or something worse, a myth powerful enough to justify evil in the eyes of believers? As they stepped into the center of the clearing, something had changed. The spiral was gone. In its place, a circle of bones. Small, clean, animal bones, arranged with impossible precision around the hollow base of a wide cedar. Elena took a step forward. "She wants us to go inside." Clara glanced at the hollow. It was just wide enough for one person to crawl through, a tunnel carved by nature and time. "Or someone else wants us to disappear," she murmured. But before she could stop her, Elena was already kneeling, peering into the darkness. "There's light," she whispered. "Faint, but it's there." Clara hesitated, then followed. They crawled side by side through the damp tunnel, the earth cool against their palms, roots dangling from above like ancient fingers. After several meters, it opened into a hollow chamber, man-made but aged, like it had been abandoned for decades. On the walls, symbols had been carved in overlapping layers, triangles, eyes, trees with human faces. In the center of the space stood an altar-like stump, and resting atop it, a small toy, Lily's old bear, the one she had lost during the early search. Elena gasped and reached for it. Tucked beneath it was another page from Mina's sketchbook. This one showed two girls standing at the base of a tree, watching shadows in the distance. Written below, "He brings gifts before taking. If you take back, he follows." Clara felt a chill race up her spine. It's not just myth, this was ritual. As they exited the chamber, Clara marked the location on her GPS. They needed more than intuition now. They needed evidence, and fast. Back in town, she sent the coordinates to Agent Davis and requested ground-penetrating radar. Davis arrived that night, tense. "You're not going to believe this," he said, handing Clara a folder. Inside were photos taken by drone earlier that afternoon, over the eastern ridge. There's a structure buried beneath the earth, circular, concrete, about 20 feet underground. It's not on any records, no foundation permits, no power lines, but it's there. Clara stared at the images. A shelter? A vault, Davis said, and probably not abandoned. By morning, they returned to the site with 2 federal agents. As they neared the hollow tree again, they spotted something new. A candle burning at the edge of the stones. Clara raised her hand, motioning the others to stop. Next to the candle was a small hand-drawn map and a note. "Tonight, one girl, alone, or the door stays closed forever." The handwriting matched Mina's. "She's luring us in," Davis said, "or someone is using her to bait us." Elena looked at Clara, her voice quiet but firm. "Let me go," Clara turned sharply. "No, absolutely not. I know it's insane. Elena said. "But if there's even a chance that my daughter is connected to this, if Mina is alive and being used, I have to go. They don't want feds. They want a mother." Davis frowned. "You'd be going in unarmed. No surveillance, no tracker. We can't protect you." "I don't need protection," Elena replied. "I need answers." That night, just before dusk, Elena returned to the clearing alone. She wore a hidden mic, but the signal cut out the moment she stepped into the circle of stones. The last thing Clara heard was Elena whispering, "I'm here," then silence. Elena followed the crude map down a different trail this time. Steeper, narrower, barely a path at all. After nearly an hour of descent, she found it. A stone hatch embedded in the side of a cliff, hidden behind vines. A symbol was carved into it, the same eye from Mina's drawings. It opened with a groan, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. She stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and a metallic scent. The walls were smooth concrete, but the floor was layered with rugs and blankets, as if someone, or many, had lived here. Then, from the shadows, a voice. "You shouldn't have come alone." Elena turned sharply. From the far end of the chamber, a figure stepped forward, a man, maybe 60, with sharp gray eyes and a long scar down his cheek. He wasn't dressed like a cultist or a drifter. He wore a ranger's jacket. "You're Merrick?" she breathed. "You were supposed to be dead." "I was supposed to be a lot of things," he said calmly. "But you're just a mother. And that makes you dangerous in ways most people don't understand." Behind him, another figure emerged. A girl, no older than 11, with tangled hair and a blank stare. Mina. Elena stepped forward, heart racing. "Mina, it's okay. You're safe now." But the girl didn't move. She looked at Merrick, awaiting command. "She doesn't trust you," he said. "Not yet, and maybe not ever. We taught her that mothers forget. Mothers leave." "That's a lie," Elena hissed. "You stole her. You stole all of them." Merrick smiled slowly. "No, we gave them sanctuary, a world without pain, without betrayal. The forest asked for balance. We provided it." "Where's Lily?" Elena demanded. Merrick tilted his head. "She was never yours to begin with." The silence following Merrick's words was more than unsettling. It was warping, as though the forest itself had inhaled and was refusing to exhale until the truth was spoken. Elena stood frozen, her hands clenched, every instinct inside her battling the rising scream in her throat. "You're lying," she said, voice brittle. "She's mine. I carried her. I nursed her. I searched for her for 6 years." Merrick didn't blink. "And still, you let her go with him that day," he said softly, almost pitying. "The forest doesn't just steal, it selects. The children who remain, those who adapt, belong here. They're not yours anymore." Elena's breath hitched. "Where is my daughter?" But it wasn't Merrick who answered. Mina, the girl who had been watching quietly, stepped forward and reached for Elena's hand. Her fingers were cold, fragile, but her eyes, those eyes, were ancient. "He didn't take her like the others," Mina whispered. "He promised she could choose, and she did." Elena fell to her knees. What do you mean?" Mina knelt beside her and opened the sketchbook she always carried. She flipped to the back, where a single page was folded and sealed with sap. Carefully, she peeled it open and held it out. A drawing, charcoal and smudged, showed 2 girls at the edge of a cliff. One walked away with a shadowed figure. The other stood behind, clutching a bear, and scribbled beneath it in a child's uneven hand, "She's still watching the river." Clara, Davis, and a tactical team waited just beyond the ridge, monitoring for any signal, when Elena's voice crackled through the static. "I found Mina! But Lily's not here?" Clara felt the weight drop into her stomach like stone. She gave the order. "Breach." Flashlights pierced the cavern. Merrick vanished down a secondary passage before they reached him, leaving only faint footprints and the echo of retreat. But Mina didn't run. She clung to Elena, whispering things no child should know, about dark rooms and forest rules, about how some girls are trained to forget and some are trained to remember. It wasn't until the next day, while Mina slept in a recovery ward wrapped in blankets and silence, that Clara decoded the clue. She's still watching the river. The search shifted again. They combed every inch of the gorge's waterline until finally, a park ranger noticed something strange near the base of an old stone watchtower, trails of red thread tied to trees winding down to a hidden ledge. There, sitting cross-legged on a moss-covered rock, was a girl. Her hair was longer now, darker, tangled like the forest itself. She was humming to herself, clutching a bear missing one eye. She didn't flinch when they called her name. "Lily?" Clara said gently. The girl didn't move. "Lily, my name is Clara. Your mom, she's looking for you. She's never stopped." Slowly the girl turned. Her face was sunburnt, speckled with dirt, but unmistakable. And then in a voice barely above the breeze, she said, "Is it safe to go now?" Clara nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, you're safe now." When Elena saw her daughter step out of the trees, led by Clara and wrapped in a ranger's coat, she broke. No words, no scream, just a soundless sob that cracked her from the inside out. Lily stared at her. There was no instant recognition, no Hollywood embrace. But then, slowly, she walked forward, placed her bear in Elena's hands, and whispered, "I think I remember your eyes." It was enough. It was everything. In the months that followed, the truth unraveled piece by piece. Merrick had been part of an extremist off-grid group that believed in forest pacts, sacrifices to keep the wilds undisturbed. He had stolen children, raised them under ritual and silence, believing he was protecting them from a corrupted world. Avery, the ranger who had started it all, had once been a believer too, until guilt drove him to isolation and eventual arrest. Mina was the first to testify. Her drawings became a roadmap. Her silence, once survival, became a weapon against those who thought they had erased her past. Lily didn't speak much at first. She didn't like crowds. She didn't like music. But she loved the smell of lavender, the weight of her mother's arms, and the creak of the porch swing where she could sit and watch the sky without fear. Healing was not fast, but it was real. On the 1-year anniversary of her return, Elena and Lily planted a ghost orchid in their backyard, a flower that shouldn't grow here, but somehow did. "For the forest to remember the ones who left," Lily said. And when Elena looked at her daughter, brave, scarred, alive, she finally let herself believe the nightmare was over. Some ghosts stay, but some find their way home. Some disappearances make headlines, some become cold cases, but the ones that truly haunt us are the ones that end in silence. Lily returned, but not all the children do, and not all the scars can be seen. The forest kept its secrets for 6 years, and when it finally spoke, it spoke through the voice of a child, one who drew what she couldn't say. This is not just a story of loss. It's a story of survival, of a mother's unbreakable bond, and of the quiet war between memory and forgetting. If this story moved you, subscribe for more mysteries that deserve to be told. Share your thoughts below. What would you do if it were your child? And remember, not all who are lost want to be found.